Technology is the study of.
Right.
Is that an actual?
I don't think it's an actual study. Like, I don't think you could go anywhere and get a course on teology. I didn't make it up. There are other people that have used the word before, because people throw ology behind everything, you know. But I just liked it because I'm the type of person that I want to study things. I want to know what they're all about. I want to know the history. I want to understand how they work. I want to understand the applications of them. So I just like the idea, and people will tell me all the time, and we'll probably get into this, but they'll tell me, wow, you know so much about tea. Well, I guess I am kind of a professor of tea, teology professor. So that's how I came up with that. It's really just a hobby, just for fun.
Do you have a business that's tied to this?
I don't have any products that I sell. So it really is just, I have a website, I have an Instagram, I have a Facebook, I have Twitter, but I don't sell anything. And it's a side gig that I just play around with just for fun because I love tea. So someday I might try to sell something on it, but for now, it's just for fun.
What's your main occupation?
So I am in marketing and brand development. So I work with multiple clients. I work with the Alderman Group here in town. So,
what's his name? First name?
Rob.
Rob yeah.
Alderman.
Rob
yep.
Alderman.
So I work with the Alderman Group. I do a lot of stuff on my own as well. Boys and Girls Club is one of my clients. And so I do brand management, marketing, social media marketing, as well as traditional marketing. So
I guess Donald Trump is the guy that used to brand stuff so much, right? With the ties and the hats and the.
Well, Donald Trump he's definitely he's a slick business guy. I mean, he's made his billions, and I mean, I don't know how much he's involved in the day-to-day of the Trump brand, but the Trump brand, at least before all the election stuff started, before he got into politics, it was a pretty strong brand. He got into all kinds of stuff.
Isn't it funny that somebody can brand something?
Yeah.
And even though you know they don't make it, and they have nothing to do with it, simply because their name's on it,
mm-hmm.
you want to buy it more.
Yeah.
Like tennis shoes or
mm-hmm.
clothes or.
Brand recognition is powerful.
Well, what makes that so powerful?
Well, the way that I explain brand to people is I compare it to a mental tattoo, right? So I don't know if you know, I don't have any tattoos, but I know how they're made. It basically is a needle poking ink through the first layer of skin into the second layer of skin. And it just pokes tens of thousands of times per minute, over and over and over again, until it comes out as an image, right? Because that ink is getting into that second layer of skin. Branding is the same way. The more you poke your brand into someone's brain, the more a picture begins to form through all the neurons and the dendrites and axons, and they're all the neural networking, and it's creating a picture in the brain that you literally can't get away from once it's branded in there. It becomes part of long-term memory. Your brain starts to refer to it, starts to build additional networks and records to it. And so once a brand is strong in your brain, it is really hard to get something else to take its place. That's the power of branding. But now, to do that is not easy. It's super hard to build that kind of brand recognition, that kind of brand loyalty. That's why you can name on one hand the number of companies that have been able to do it successfully. Apple and Disney and et cetera, et cetera.
Coca-Cola.
Yeah, because they've had years and millions, maybe tens of millions of dollars that they've invested in doing those little pokes over and over and over again.
Nudges,
yeah.
I call them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that creates that strong brand.
So if you keep, I've heard people say that if you tell a lie long enough, people will believe it. Is that the same sort of thing?
It is similar.
I mean, does the product have to be, or does the brain, the thing behind the thing that the brand is branding, mm-hmm. does it have to be really good? Is that a prerequisite, or does it really not matter if you get enough pokes at the person's?
Well, that's an interesting question, because branding is, and you'll hear people say this, it isn't what you do, it's what the customer believes that you do, right? But that's kind of a misnomer in the sense that the customer doesn't believe anything about you if you don't do anything, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't know you exist. So it does have a lot to do with what you do. But over a course of time, in the same way that you have a perception of what Lee University is like, or of what the Alderman Group is like, where did that perception come from? How did that form in your mind? Well, everywhere you go that anything about those two brands have been mentioned, whether it's a conversation between two people on the street or something you saw on the news or something you read in a book that all of those things come together to form that mental tattoo, that image in your brain. And so it takes a long time, it takes a lot of interactions for people to get a nice, good mental tattoo of a brand. And you can't point to just one thing. And so in some ways, what I teach people in terms of branding is if you want to build a strong brand, in other words, you want to be the person who's driving the creation of that mental tattoo, then you need to pick what I would call a North Star, right? This is who we are and what we're about, and then you need to poke that over and over and over and over again, relentlessly and consistently poking that same message, because eventually people start to believe that that is what the brand is all about.
And if they have a bad experience, does sometimes the advertising or the branding overcome that?
It can. So you take it. I'll give you a good example of what's going on right now. Now, I stay out of politics, and so you're going to have a hard time getting me to talk politics because I try to stay out of it. But if it's related to marketing, I love talking about it. And right now, the marketing battle, the brand battle between Trump and Biden is a perfect example of that. So Trump has had...
Wait just a minute. Is there somebody behind them like you that builds brands that's doing this?
Oh, yeah. Lots of somebody's behind them that are advising them, that are helping them.
Yeah.
They have whole teams.
So this is no accident.
Oh, no. Nothing about it's an accident.
All right, go ahead.
And so you've got Trump, who's built a brand now over the past 30 years, right? Mm-hmm. You've got the Trump brand, and it's hard to escape that. Well, the Biden family has had a long history too. They've got their own brand that they've been building. Okay, but when somebody comes up and they say, maybe the news will post an article or do a story that's an expose saying this about Trump that's opposite of the Trump brand, or this about Biden that's opposite of the Biden brand. Well, you got people who aren't bought in who will go, well, there you go. That's it. Mm-hmm. But you got people who have already bought into the brand. They already have that strong mental tattoo. It doesn't matter what you tell them. They're going to look at that and go, I don't believe it.
They could see it, not believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they have convinced themselves, their brain is literally protecting that image, saying, no, that doesn't jive with what I already believe, so I just reject that. And your brain is like, I teach people that your brain is like a gated community, right? In order to get new information into the brain, you have to have some way of telling the guard at the gate, yeah, I belong in there.
Now, the guard at the gate in this situation would be your neurons?
Yeah, it's just different parts of your brain that are taking in the sensory information from all different sources, right? And it's measuring that information and deciding whether or not it needs to get through. Does it have anything in here that it's connected to? And that's why a lot of times people will say, well, if it's novel enough, the brain will pay attention. Yes, the brain does pay attention to novel information, but it doesn't mean it'll keep it.
What do you mean novel information?
So like if you showed me something that was, you said, hey, look, this is tea, and it looked like that. Well, that's novel, because I've never seen tea that looks like that, unless maybe you're talking about a pure air cake, which still doesn't really look like that.
Yeah.
So I would pay attention. But I wouldn't necessarily believe you. I would automatically put up a skepticism wall that says, I don't know, that I'm not convinced of that. So, but if I'm intrigued enough, I might say, okay, tell me more. And if you can get past my suspicion and arouse enough intrigue in me, then I'll start taking in more information to be willing to learn. But as long as all you're doing is arousing suspicion, my brain says, nope, not interested.
let's say, for instance, one religion versus another. A guy grows up Methodist and he becomes Baptist, or
Right.
he grows up Catholic and he becomes Muslim or something.
Sure.
So you talk about branding. That probably is the most
Right.
branding,
Yeah.
I guess, that you could have.
Yeah, because there's a whole lot more involved in that. When you start talking about religion, you're talking about the deepest, what I would call true core values of a person. So a lot of times we talk about values in business, and you got to put your values on your website, blah blah blah, right? We're not all talking about the same things. Like, I like green beans. I value green beans, but I'm not willing to die for green beans, right?
Yeah.
But my faith in Christ, yeah, I'm willing to die for that. So there's a difference between those kinds of values, things that I value, and things that are core values, which is what I would call a hill to die on. Yeah, core values are all, when you start talking about someone's religious beliefs, you're talking about their core values. Things that once you start poking, it's like poking a bear. Because those things are held so deeply and so intertwined with not just all the wiring in their brain, but with the deepest part of who they are and what they believe about themselves. And it's really an affront to people when you start challenging their beliefs, because you're literally not challenging them. It's not a disconnect. I can't disconnect who I am from what I believe about Christ and the Bible. So when people challenge my beliefs, it takes a lot of mental effort for me to not be offended by that, because you are literally challenging the deepest part of me.
Maybe what your parents taught you.
That's a lot of it, yeah.
Because now you're saying they were wrong.
That's right, yeah. Or your grandparents, or
Yeah.
the same thing that my whole family's believed for generations, or whatever it is. So,
I was at the buffet line one time at Ryan's Steakhouse, and I was with the dozer man, and I passed by the pinto beans, and he said, "Aren't you going to have any pinto beans?" And I said, "Well, I don't want any today." He said, "Are you going against your raisin?" And that was a very interesting statement to me. He got pinto beans because, and I'll be honest, I got them. I went ahead and got them. I thought, well, I don't go against my raisin.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But then there are times when people do specifically choose to go against their raisin, right? To do things that, like, for example, me, and this could easily start a fight, so let's not let it start a fight. But my whole family, I grew up in South Georgia, born and raised in South Georgia. I am in every sense of the word a true deep South Southerner, every sense of the word. My family listened to all country music. I hate, loathe, and despise country music. There's not anything even slight about it that I like. I'm a rock and roll guy.
Country western?
I hate country. Well, I guess it depends on how far back you go. You know?
Waylon Jennings?
You got to go further back than that. Yeah, it's got to go way back for me to appreciate it. So that's an example where I was raised in this atmosphere, but at some point, probably when I was preteen, I rejected that and I chose a different path, and now I can't go back to that. But I don't dislike anyone that likes country music, right?
Why do you think that people, now, do you think it's because you genuinely like rock and roll? Rock and roll? Or do you think it's subconsciously it's a rebellion against your family that's okay to do?
Right, that's a great question. And I've actually thought about that, because one of the reasons I hate country music is because of the steel guitar. It's just the whiniest instrument to me personally. Again, that's a preferential thing. That's not a definitive statement. But I just hate the sound of the instrument. But I have so many great memories of being in my grandmother's house because every Friday night there were people that came over, and this one guy brought over, he had one of those lap guitars, and he played that thing and just
Had the piece of metal,
oh,
metal finger.
Yep.
Right.
Man, he played the mess out of that thing. He was really good, and that's what they did every weekend. They'd have a bushel of oysters and crackers and hot sauce and country music. Those are great memories. So I don't know. I don't know at what point I really changed and what point I decided, once I got old enough to listen to music. It probably is like most kids. It's whatever you're influenced by, your schoolmates, and I imagine that's some of it, although I don't remember. So.
I like rock and roll and hard rock. I saw your website and some of the bands that you listen to, and I listen to them too, and Guns N' Roses especially, and Leonard Skinner.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't like that kind of music, you haven't heard that kind of music.
Right.
I mean, literally.
Yeah.
There's no real, well, maybe I wouldn't. You just can't help but like it.
Yeah.
It's like a milkshake. How could you not like a milkshake?
One of the very first concerts I ever attended my whole life, I must have not been more than 10 or 11 years old, was Molly Hatchet and 38 Special.
Boy, they were good, weren't they?
Oh, man, good
they
stuff.
They were good.
Yeah.
I remember 38 Special, I guess I was probably in the 8th grade, something like that. And but I've gotten more speeding tickets over Prince than I have any of them. Something about his music will make you speed in a car.
Hey, listen, I love the Purple Rain. I love him.
That's an interesting shirt.
This shirt I actually bought in Minneapolis.
Let me feel that. Is that?
That's silk.
Boy, that's nice.
That's silk. I got this in Minneapolis. I was actually with my family where my kids do speech and debate, and they were competing in a national tournament because they've all done really well in that arena. And the tournament was in Minneapolis, and one of my boys, my middle son Ian, found this shirt for me. He was like, "Dad, we cannot leave without this shirt." I was like, if I'm in Minneapolis, I'm going to buy a purple shirt. There's just no way.
Purple is supposed to be a color of royalty, right?
Royalty, that's right. Yeah.
But the red is a juxtaposition, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. So it's got some gold down here, got some gold underlay. So got my little tags of this is number 500 of 663.
It says expensive.
Yeah, I won't tell you how much they value at. So
it's a nice shirt.
I didn't pay near as much as they retail for. Let's just say that. I'm a bargain hunter.
So you think branding, I understand what you do now for a living, and this is the hobby.
Right.
I've had more interest in people telling them that I'm going to have a teologist.
That's awesome.
Than anything that I've told them I was going to do.
Really?
Now, what makes that so? In fact, let's have some tea.
Yeah, let's do it.
Which one do you recommend?
All right, so I'll just kind of do this up like this so that you can see.
So you got your own.
So this is just labels I put on. I did not make these teas, so I don't. I've thought about it, but man, that's a lot of work, and I don't want to be a distributor. But so when I get a tea, now this is just part of my collection. I usually keep this hanging on the wall for easy access. The reason it has these little hook things on the back, but I'll transfer them into these airtight jars because tea is super fragile. If you don't keep it in an airtight container away from direct sunlight, you're going to ruin it. And basically, you're going to be drinking cardboard before long. So tea has to be protected, no matter what kind of tea it is. So I transfer them to these jars because most of the time they come in boxes or tins that aren't
Abundant
airtight.
Living has them in bags, or you can scoop it out. I noticed.
Yep. And so you put them in. I put them in these jars, and then I make a little label for it, and then I throw the container that it comes from away. Sometimes I'll cut out. You'll see some of these underneath my label is the label from the brand itself that might give special instructions. But usually what I do when I drink a tea, I have a journal. So this is my tea tasting journal. When I drink a tea for the first time, I'll do an actual tasting, And I go through and I write down and I make all of my notes. That way I know when I come to try that tea again, I know what to expect. And sometimes I'll go and do multiple steepings, and I'll experiment with different things, and I can tell you all about those to see if it changes the flavor, because a lot of times it will, depending on what you do. So that's what I do. These are different teas I have. This is probably my favorite daily tea. This is a Gunpowder Green Tea, which is sort of a common Chinese green tea. They call it gunpowder, and this should sit just fine like this. They call it gunpowder because you can see it looks like little gunpowder pellets.
Yeah, it does.
The way they process it, they roll it.
It's rolled, whereas this is a leafy.
Yeah.
That looks like marijuana or something.
That is herbal tea. That's peppermint.
Pepper.
So that's just a plain peppermint.
Now, what's the difference between this and regular? I've got teas over here. I drink green tea and Bigelow. And
So all tea comes from one plant. It's called Camellia sinensis. And if you are drinking actual tea, it is from the Camellia sinensis plant.
this tea, Bigelow, Lipton.
All comes from the same plant, Camellia sinensis. But that one plant produces, I think the last count I saw was 20,000 different kinds of teas.
And I thought there were 10.
So there are types of teas. So there's white,
Black.
yellow, green, oolong, black, and puer. Those are your 6 types of teas,
All from the one plant.
all from the same plant. And out of those 6 types come the 20,000 plus varieties. And it depends on where it's grown, the time of year they harvest it, what the soil is like where it's at, what's growing near it. Tea is very absorbent, so it takes on whatever's around it. In fact, you can take a tea bag, throw it in a shoe, and it'll absorb the odors from your shoe. Tea is just super absorbent, which is why you have to keep them, another reason, have to be sealed airtight, because they will, you take an unsealed thing of tea and put it in your refrigerator, and it's going to pick up every smell in your refrigerator, and your tea will taste like that when you drink it. So it's very absorbent. So all of these get processed different ways. So that's a green tea right there, the gunpowder green. This
Green is one of our 7. Or
green
6.
is one of the 6.
6.
Right? Yep. And I'll explain to you in just a second how those are processed. Malachi McCormick's is probably my favorite black tea. This is in just a basic English breakfast tea, kind of like what you would see. That's actually what would be in a tea bag.
What of this 6?
It's a black tea.
Black tea.
Yep. This is called Cinnamon Sunset. It has a lot of cinnamon. You see that's in pyramid bags, but it's a black tea, and it has a lot of different cinnamon in it and some orange peel. It's really, really good tea. This is called a rooibos, which is not actually a tea. It doesn't come from the Camellia sinensis plant. It comes from a plant, a bush that grows in Africa.
Now, I've drunk that before, but,
Rooibos.
but that's not a tea.
Well, people say tea anytime they drink something that's infused, but technically it is a tisane. So because it doesn't come from the Camellia sinensis plant. Anything that doesn't come from an actual tea plant is a tisane. So, some people will call them herbal teas.
Senilius
Camellia sinensis.
Camellia, that's a tea plant.
Yeah, it's a bush. When you see pictures of people like at tea farms, they're usually this high because the pickers are walking along and they're picking off the leaves, right? But if you let it just grow wild, like there are a lot of places. In fact, I don't think I have it up here, but I have some tea that's from wild tea plants, and they grow as big as trees. They can be 20, 30 feet tall.
What would they taste like before you do this?
Again, that's one of those 20,000 varieties. It literally depends on where it's growing as to how they taste. And the more you drink, the reason that I really encourage people to keep a tea journal, and I can make this, anybody who wants a copy of this, I'm happy to provide a copy free. They can just...
And they can get a hold of you through your website.
Yep, they can get a hold of me through my website or hit me up on social media, either at Teology Prof or Eric Wilbanks, either one, and just say, hey, I want a copy of that journal, and I'll email it to them. But the reason I encourage people to do this is because you train, it's like a lot of times tea is compared to wine. I don't drink any alcohol, so I don't really know exactly how similar it is, but the process of being able to distinguish subtle differences between wines, the same way with tea. Again, if there's 20,000 different varieties of tea, all from one plant, then you got to know there's some subtle differences there. So doing something like this trains your senses to pay attention to, is it fruity, is it vegetal, is it floral, is it roasted, is it sweet, is it milky, blah, 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 all those kind of things. And then just marking those things down, making notes, what's the brew color like, how hefty is it, how does it feel in your mouth, is it dry, is it wet, all those different kind of things that apply to wine apply to tea as well.
So someone that, like a Earl Grey tea.
Yep, that's a black tea.
Who says this is an Earl Grey tea?
So what makes an Earl Grey is the recipe. So it's a black tea, and it's either scented or flavored with bergamot, which is a kind of a citrus fruit. Not quite lemony, not orange. It's different. It's its own citrus. So anytime you take a black tea and you scent it or flavor it with bergamot, that's Earl Grey. That's the recipe.
Well, they have Lady Grey.
Yes.
What's it?
Now that depends. That depends on who the manufacturer is and whether or not it's got this or that in it. And sometimes they'll put vanilla in them, and so that's a little bit different. But there, again, you could go like one of my favorite brands that I drink a lot of. You can see is Harney and Sons. I've got several Harney and Sons teas here. That's almost always who I buy my Gunpowder Grey from. In fact, although this English tea store is really good. They'll have, if you look on their website, there's probably 200 different blends of teas. They have their version of Earl Grey or Lady Grey, and then English Tea Store is going to have theirs, and any of these others. Mighty Leaf's going to have theirs. Tea of Life will have theirs.
Their version of Earl Grey.
And sometimes it could be the difference between where they sourced their black tea. Right. Sometimes it could be a difference of how much bergamot flavoring is in it, or if they've added anything else to the mixture. Is it something other than just black tea and bergamot? So there are lots of different varieties and blends out there, and you just have to experiment. I mean, there's no good or bad, no right or wrong. It just is, what do you like?
Through your research.
Yeah. Yeah, you learn what you like. I've got mine on this little sheet because I'm a theology prof, right? It's got little mustaches. So, like this tea right on here in front is a Mustang green tea that comes from Nepal. I gave it a 4.5 mustaches. It was super good tea. But then I've got other teas in here. I just tried one the other day. This right here, saffron sencha tea. It comes from saffron in Afghanistan. I gave it a 3 stars because that saffron was really hard to deal with.
What was it, like a heavier?
So the tea itself was good. It was a green tea. It had ginger, which I love. It had lemongrass, which I love. It had peppermint, which I love. But it's the saffron that I couldn't get past. It was kind of the only thing I can think of personally to compare it to, and that's all tasting is about comparing it to what you've already tasted before. That's the heart of tasting anything. It was kind of like black licorice, and I just don't like licorice, and so the saffron in there just didn't do it for me.
Now, tea bags, when I just go like order, I drink a green tea or what's that other thing? Ginger, or there's the other thing I drink. I got 3 that I drink. I just grab one a day, and I feel like it's giving me, like ginger's good for their stomach.
Fantastic.
It seems to calm me down a little bit if I'm nervous. Green tea seems to pick me up a little bit, gives me a little bit of a
little pickup,
fighting edge or a little agitation, which I like. And so are those teas? I mean, they say tea, but are they in all of the varieties?
So ginger would be a tisane. It's an herbal tea. So you're just taking the root, the ginger root, and you're making a tea out of it. Some people just literally put nothing in the cup except hot water and a slice of ginger, and they drink it. Sometimes maybe add some honey. I've done that before. I like to add, last night I made myself a cup of Gunpowder Green Tea, I almost always slice off the yellow of a lemon peel. I don't zest it because it's too messy. I actually take a knife and slice off just the yellow, not into the pith, not into the white part. Drop it in my tea, cut off a piece of ginger root, drop it in my tea, grab some of these mint leaves, put a few of those in my tea, and that's my favorite blend. I love that. I drink that a lot.
That's like an alchemist.
Yeah, that's right.
If you were going to brand a tea, that would be one of your recipes.
Yeah, that'd be a signature because that's something I love. I drink that a lot. The only difference is a lot of times I'll also put lavender in it. I just happen to be
lavender's a plant, a flower.
Yep, and when you get a few see lavender growing, like I've got a buddy who's got some lavender growing in his little garden, little mint garden outside, and when you process it, it's just these little, almost like little pellets, little blue tiny pellets. But man, they're strong. I mean, if you want a cup of tea with lavender in it, I mean, if you got more than a pinky thumbnail of lavender, you're probably going to be overwhelmed by it. So it's very strong. Mint is also super strong. So just a pinch will do you.
Now, do you do just the bags, or I noticed you got some?
So yeah, I've got all kinds of infuser options. So like this is one, you just take your loose leaf. So almost everything I drink is loose leaf. I do have things that come in bags because I like them, and that's the only way they come. So I'll drink them like that. But I do prefer the loose leaf. You just drop it in there.
Well, let's try some English breakfast, maybe.
So yep, you just take a scoop, you drop it in there, and then you infuse it in your water. Now, for something like that English breakfast, if you wanted to try that, I would definitely recommend using a tea bag because look how tiny that is. And so if you use something like this infuser, some of that's going to get through. Whereas if you use a tea bag, it's not going to get through at all.
Well, let's do the infuser.
Okay. So if you wanted to use, and then I use this every single day for my green tea. It works the same exact way. Oops. Sorry. So it works the same exact way. I just drop my tea in there. I pour my water in there, and then it brews, and when it's done brewing, I always set a timer. You just set it on top of your cup, and it'll automatically pour out into the glass. There's a little release mechanism on the bottom. So I use that every single day. Let's see, I was going to show you the rest of these teas real quick. That's a bag tea. That's coconut and black tea. This is actually the only working tea farm in America is in Charleston. And so this is black tea that comes from the Charleston Tea Plantation, Charleston, South Carolina. That's a good tea there. Vanilla cupcake. This is actually a rooibos, again, which is the African bush, and it has vanilla in it. Moringa is not a tea. It is a different kind of plant related to the holly. It's very energy oriented, so a lot more caffeine in it than tea typically is. In fact, this has probably as much caffeine as a cup of coffee. Yaupon is the same way, another holly bush, mostly grown in Florida and Texas. And then this vanilla coconut is a black tea. It's just a black bag tea with some vanilla and some coconut in it. So what sounds good to you?
Well, let's try this. This one? No, that's the bag one.
That's the Moringa.
We want to do one. We want to do one with that, right?
You want to do one with this?
Yeah, I think
and you
so.
can use this too. This is another infuser. Same thing. You put your tea in there and you set it down. Or some way that I'll do it sometimes is if I have a pot, I'll put my leaves in my pot, let it brew there, and then I just use this as a strainer, and then set it aside.
And that's better than a tea bag.
And here's why. If you like tea, it doesn't matter what anybody says is better or not better. If you like it, then that's all that matters, period. But it's kind of the difference if all you've ever had is a hamburger from McDonald's and then someone takes you out to a really nice steakhouse and gives you a steak. It's both meat. They might even both have come from the same cow. But you realize there's something quite different about this over this. The difference is all those things that I said at the beginning. Tea is so fragile. And most tea that comes in a tea bag comes like this in a box. That means it's been exposed to air now for probably 6 months before you even bought it off the shelf. So all the good stuff has already leached out and dried up.
So taking a tea bag
Right.
from the store, Lipton or something.
Yeah. You just aren't getting the full flavor that's available. It's the same way that you aren't getting like steak and a hamburger. It's the same exact thing, but somehow there's so much more fullness of flavor in that steak that you aren't getting in that hamburger, right? It's the same way with loose leaf tea. When you get full leaf tea, you're getting all the good things that are in the leaf, all the theorubicins and all the scientific things that people say make tea so good for you. They're in that leaf. But once it gets broken down into what typically goes in a tea bag, like what's in this tea bag, this is what in the tea industry they actually call tea dust. It's what's left over after they've scooped up all the leaves. It's just little particles of tea. And so it doesn't have as many of all the different elements in it that make tea so delicious and so full of flavor.
When I drink Bigelow tea, they've really just done some good branding as far as.
Yeah, and Bigelow has great tea.
Yeah.
I like a lot of their teas. In fact, Bigelow owns the Charleston Tea Plantation now. They bought it. Again, Bigelow is an American company, and they bought the only tea plantation in America, Charleston Tea Plantation, and now if you drink American Classic, it actually is Bigelow that owns that.
Let's try this one.
Yeah, that's a great tea.
You want to try some too?
Yeah, I'll drink that with you. So what I'm going to do is I know I'm going to be off camera here for just a second.
I'll get the water.
Well, it has to be set at a certain certain temperature. So what we'll do is, and this, what I use here is a kettle, and I'm going to kind of be close to you so you can hear me. But so the kettle has to be on an exact temperature for your teas. Actually, this is on the right temperature because I just set it recently. But this kettle will allow me to program it to exactly what I want.
Which is what?
So for black tea, it's 210 degrees, generally speaking. So, and that's in my little guide here as well. So you can see that I have a list here that says this is the tea type and this is the typical temperature. So if it's a black tea, it's anywhere from 195 to 212. So my kettle will technically go to 212, but I don't use it. I just leave it at 210. But you can program it at 1 degree anywhere you want. And it's anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes, depends on what I'll do when I'm tasting a tea for the first time is I follow whatever the manufacturer's instructions are on the box or the package. If they say brew it at 208 degrees for 3 minutes, then I brew it at 208 for 3 minutes. And then sometimes I'll come back, I'll brew it again and again and again and experiment with different temperatures and different times to see if it tastes different, because a lot of times it will.
So the recommended, when you get a box of tea, does it have a recommended?
Always.
And see, nobody does that. They just throw it in the tea bag, take it off the stove and pour it in and put a lid on it and drink it on your way out the door.
Which is why people, like if you talk to somebody who's from, say, Great Britain, right, and they've come over here and they'll complain and say, Americans don't know how to make tea. Well, it's not that Americans don't know how to make tea, it's just that most Americans do what you just said. So they aren't paying attention to the temperature, the water, the time, and the type of leaf. They just don't pay attention to any of that, they just throw it in. Or you use what you have. Like for a long time, all I had was we had our coffee maker at home. And the coffee maker brews water at 185 or 190 degrees. But if you're going to drink a black tea, it needs to be hot. It's just that 185 degrees is not hot enough to properly brew it.
Not necessarily drink it that hot, but it needs to have
it needs to brew that hot.
Brew that hot.
Yeah.
To get the full flavor that they intend for you to have.
Right. On the other hand, if you were going to drink a white tea and you used your Keurig to make the water, that's way too hot. You're going to burn that tea because it needs to be brewed at 175 or even lower. Some people will recommend 150 or 160.
For a white tea.
For a white tea because they're so delicate. So yeah, all of that makes a big difference. So what we'll do here, we'll go ahead and let you pull out a bag for yourself there. I'll do the same thing. And then we're going to take and we're going to put 2 scoops. My little tea thing here, we're going to put it in your bag.
2 scoops.
2 scoops. That makes a nice, good, strong cup of tea.
Is there a pull? Yeah, there's a pull string.
There is a pull string. Yep.
So I'm sort of gauging how long this takes me versus in the mornings.
The tea is meant to be a slow, contemplative process. If you want a good cup of tea, then you have to be willing to take it slow. That's how you get your best tea. Now, if you're just in a hurry and you want something, that's why tea bags still work. So sometimes what I'll do sometimes is I'll brew my water. Say for this is another 210 degree. I'll brew my water at 210. I'll drop my tea bag in, pour my water in, put my lid on, drive to where I'm going, which is about 5 minutes away. It's brewed the right amount of time. I pull
And the
tea
right
bag
temperature.
at the right temperature because it stays in my insulated cup. I pull it out, throw it away, and then I've got a good cup of tea. So it can be fast, but tea is so much better when you do it slow, when you allow it to take time and to.
I was watching a YouTube thing on London when they had approaching tea time.
Right.
It's almost a ritual.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And there are lots of different actual rituals for tea, depends on where you drink it. So they have their own version, and the British have one version, right? If you're Chinese, it's a different kind of ritual. If you're Japanese, it's an even different kind of ritual. So every country has their own sort of ritual around how they drink tea, how they consume it, what it means for them. I actually have a ritual that I don't do all the time, but I do it sometimes, and it's my own version of Lectio Divina, and it's just using tea as a contemplative thing, a way to just connect with God. And so I actually taught some of this on the theology. So if you go back and watch some of those Theology Prof videos on my Facebook page, where I did what I call the steep thoughts, just talking to people about, it was a bunch of psychology stuff, willpower and et cetera, self-control. But at the end of those, I would do a Lectio Divina with tea, which is TEA. You take note of the tea, which is what we'll do here in just a second. What does it look like? What does the dry leaf smell like? What size is it? Is it broken? Is it full? Blah, blah, blah.
Is that all in your, what'd you call it?
Lectio, steep thoughts on, yes, all that is in there. So, yeah.
So that's your version of what they're doing in London, or?
Yeah, it's my own version of what probably the most ritualistic tea consumption is going to be the Japanese. The Japanese have taken the tea ceremony to its highest art form.
Tea ceremony. So London, Britain, and Japan, they all have a ceremony.
Yeah, for London, their ceremony is really more, ceremony is probably not even the right way. It's more, if I could say ceremonial, in the sense that it's like what we think of when we think of high tea, right? It's not quite the right word, but
what is high tea?
When you have, it's very formal. You have your tea brought out. You have your layered, you got your savory things and your sweet things
Sandwiches
on the top. You have your little sandwiches and your cookies and all those kind of things. And so that when you go to a nice restaurant or hotel and they have tea time, that's really what they're giving you.
Are they eating all those things? The different, are they eating?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's,
at what time?
So a lot of people will say 3 o'clock is typical kind of tea time, but you can go to a tea time at just about any time. I mean, I think the earliest ones probably start at 10:30 and go all the way until 5:30.
Wouldn't that hurt production to stop at 3 o'clock? And
I don't know. I mean, I have tea all day long, so.
But I mean, to have a ceremony.
Oh, to have something where you take and set aside time. I don't know. I mean, you think about the Spanish culture, and they still have siestas. So a whole city's shut down to have their siesta. So, it's just a cultural thing.
I've often wondered, would we be more productive if we took high tea?
Tea time, yeah. I mean, I know I am. I take my tea time during the middle of the day. Now, again, I drink tea all day long, but I take a break to just relax, and I savor my tea. You know, I smell the aroma that comes off of it. I mean, I really take time to let it relax me. You know, I enjoy it, and I use it when I do it like that. I do it in a contemplative way. So, T is take note. E is to elevate the experience, is tasting it, is picking out those flavors, and then the A is to ascend in prayer. There's actually a scripture that says, I'll get the quote exactly wrong, but it's in the Old Testament, and let me find that for you real quick while we wait for our water to brew.
How do
It's
we know
from
when it's
Psalm 14:12. It says, "May you accept my prayer like incense." And of course, in the Old Testament, in the tabernacle, they used incense as a part of their prayer time. And so I don't use incense sticks or incense oils necessarily. I use tea as my incense because the aroma that comes off different teas is amazing.
if you're in the middle of the day and you got a real problem you're trying to work out, would tea time help you or hurt you?
I think it depends on, like for me, if I've got a real problem I need to focus on, actually what I do is I go for a walk. I like to get out in nature and I just like to walk around.
Not high tea.
No. Tea for me, I do it especially when I do it in a contemplative way, it's about relaxing. It's about just saying, I need to unwind for just a few minutes. I'm getting way too worked up over this problem. Right? I need to chill out. I need to relax. I need to calm down. And so I use tea for that.
Maybe because you're going through all this stuff, smelling it, and paying attention to the texture and the taste, maybe that's a way of not thinking about the other thing.
Yeah. It's probably similar to what people would say is mindfulness. I don't know a whole lot about mindfulness other than the fact that it's paying attention to details, slowing down, paying attention to what's going on. And I do that with tea. When I take tea as a contemplative break, I slow down and I pay attention to just the tea and to what's going on with it. And I actually have a tea service where a company will send me different kinds of teas every month. And I use those to do my tea tastings. And my tea tasting is always a very slow, quiet, purposeful moment. And it doesn't take long. I don't take hours to do it. I take 15 minutes. But it's 15 minutes where all I'm doing is focusing on the tea.
Do you think it's not as much as focusing on the tea, but not focusing on the other stuff?
If you were using it as a way to sort of get your mind off, absolutely.
So,
yeah.
But for you, that's a byproduct. You really want to study the tea.
I do. I want to train my nose and my tongue to detect all the tiny little subtleties of flavor that are in there. In fact, a perfect example of that is my tea story, which is actually on my website. You might get a hoot out of it if somebody wanted to read it. But I drank tea with honey in it for a really long time. And then I went through this time where I felt like I was getting too much sugar in my diet and it was causing me some health issues. I thought, okay, I'm just going to cut sugar out for a while and we'll just go from there. So I quit drinking honey in my tea, which I had done for a decade. And that's all I would drink in my tea was honey. Well, it took me a month to get to where I enjoyed any tea anymore because I realized what I was really enjoying was the honey mixed with tea. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't enjoying the tea. But then, it took me, like I said, about a month. I finally got used to it. And then I started noticing all these flavors that I'd never noticed before. When I drink a tea that I used to drink forever, and I would think, wow, I never noticed that had a subtle hint of peach in it. Or, man, they must have grown this tea near roses. Because I can taste that rose inside the leaf. I would have never noticed that because of all the sweeteners that I had in my tea.
Would that be a certain brand, and you'd say, "Oh, I want to get some more of that"?
Sometimes I do. I mean, if I taste a tea and I really love it, then that's the reason I have this, so I can go back and go, I loved that tea. I'm going to order more of that. Yeah.
Do you think that sometimes when we drink a tea or something, that it's the point in our life that somehow subconsciously, I was in Montego stayed at the Montego Inn.
Yeah.
And they have I forget. I was there. I was building a building in Grootly Lager, the middle of nowhere, and I would go up there and stay at that. I really kind of used it as a nice vacation. I'd stay there, and they would come around and at breakfast and bring out the box and raise it up and say,
Right.
which tea do you want?
Which tea do you want?
And I
Yep.
remember it was Robios, and boy, that really, it just hit the spot.
Yeah.
And I think it was maybe subconsciously the job was going really good. I was on budget. The people were happy. Everybody, everything. It was just.
Everything's
I
clicking.
I relate when I drink that Robios tea. I get that same feeling that
Yeah.
I had sitting at the Montego Inn. So, and that goes back to your branding. I think.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yep. In fact, you probably can think of things, because it's weird how the brain works like that. We make these associations and these connections, and it literally, again, is the brain creating. It's like a tree. If you could see all the neurons, the way they make the neural network, right? But it's making connections, and so you have this great memory, but then your brain adds, oh, you also had some rooibos tea while you were there, or oh, you were also doing this, and so your brain starts adding those other things, and then that way it can trigger those things, and so you can have a cup of rooibos, and the brain can take you back to that moment that was really special for you. It's just like when you hear a song, you know, you might hear a 38 Special song, and it takes you back to when you were in 8th grade.
I'm skating at
That's right.
I'm skating around the skate rink in Athens.
100%. Yep, I do that all the time.
They say if you could control the nation's music, you could control the nation.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Is our tea up?
It is. So, if you want.
All right, so we got the tea. Now, what do we let it sit here for 2 or 3 minutes?
Yes, so I've got my timer set here. I did this at 4 minutes and 42 seconds, just because I love the number 42. But you can do 5 minutes, you can do 4 minutes, whatever you like best.
What's significant about 42?
Have you never seen Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
No.
Oh my goodness, that's an old sci-fi. It's one of the funniest things I've ever read in my whole life.
Was it a comedy?
Yes. It was about the end of the world, and it's about this guy named Arthur Dent, and he's a British guy. He's drinking his tea, and all of a sudden he finds out that the world is about to end, and the guy who's been his best friend for years is actually an alien. And so the reason the world is going to end is because this alien race is making room for an interstellar highway, and the Earth is in the way, and so they're going to demolish it.
That sounds like my day.
It is the dumbest, stupidest, funniest thing I've ever read. And so, anyway, 42 is very significant in that. And
In
so
that movie.
Yeah, it's just a joke. So
And
I love it.
it's divisible by 2. 40 is be 21, right?
So it's just a fun thing.
Going back to smells and memories, I don't know the name of the book. I've read it, but this lady has a real. The lady has a real. I don't know if it's a biography or what, but the lady has a problem, and she can't figure out the problem, and she just heads out of town. And as she's going out of town, she smells I forget what it was, like a plant or something. And that smell resurrected several memories in her brain.
Yep.
It took her back to her childhood, and somehow it helped her solve the problem that she had.
It's powerful. And if you actually, the part of the brain that's dedicated to processing smell is massive. We just have such a huge part of our brain that's processing just smells, and to be able to retain those memories that are associated with it. Like when you walk in and you smell a chalkboard, it takes you back to when you're in elementary school. You know, it really is amazing how you can pick up a smell, and you can not smell it for 20, 30 years, but then it comes right back to you, and it's associated with that memory because, again, those networks have been linked together. And so that's me and you. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of dip it around a little bit like that, get a little extra juice, and then stir it up because you can see a lot of the tea is sort of settled on the bottom.
Do we need something to stir it with?
Nah, it's fine. So, and then just let it drain. Now, a lot of people will take and squeeze their bag. I don't squeeze it because there are a lot of, if you squeeze it, a lot of the mineral taste is going to come out, and you may or may not like that. But you can, again, you can experiment. So if you like the mineral flavors, then you squeeze your tea bag, you get a whole lot more of them. If you don't like it, if you want a smoother cup, then don't squeeze your tea bag because you're going to get a lot of that inside there.
Now, as a child, my grandmother lived on Harl Avenue, and my parents would drop me off there, and we would have jigsaw puzzles, and big jigsaw puzzles, and I would sit and work those jigsaw puzzles. She would smoke, and we would drink Lipton tea with lots of sugar and lots of milk. And why I remember that, I don't know.
Just a great
But I work jigsaw puzzles to this day, and I'm a tea drinker to this day.
Yeah.
I've not got into it to this depth, but only because of my ignorance, I guess.
Well, for me, and your tea is ready. So, for me,
have a cookie if you want. Yeah. Do you eat cookies with them?
I do. So,
these kind?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So for me, this journey of getting here is a journey that's 15 years long. So I'll just go ahead and tell you my story because I think it's the funniest story, really. So I told you I'm deep south. I am true Southerner.
Where exactly?
Columbus, Georgia.
Which is where?
Born and raised in Columbus, Georgia. It's if you go about an hour and a half south of Atlanta, and it's on the Georgia-Alabama border. So all of my family's from Columbus, Georgia.
Did you know the band Georgia-Alabama, Florida-Georgia line? There's a band.
I've heard of them, but I don't know them. So I think they're probably a little closer to the country realm of things.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so I grew up, that's the way I grew up. As a true Southerner, I drank sweet iced tea and coffee. It was always around. In fact, I joke all the time. I need to really ask my mom about this, but I joke and say she probably put sweet iced tea in my baby bottle. I mean, that's just the way it was.
Sure. Yeah.
So I would go to school. I would have a cup of coffee before school in the mornings as a kid. I would come home from school. I would drink iced tea for the rest of the day, at least a half gallon, maybe a gallon of sweet iced tea. And when we say sweet iced tea, we mean true Southern sweet iced tea, which is like syrup.
Yeah. It's really sweet.
But I was in junior high school. And so think about your junior high days, right? Now they call it middle school, but for you and I, it was junior high. Your junior high days.
I'm not as old as you, but
exactly. So your junior high days, right? There was a teacher, a science teacher. Her name was Miss White. Every single boy had a massive crush on Miss White. Beautiful lady, long black hair. And in class one day, she was talking about the effects of alcohol, tobacco, and caffeine on the body. Now, in my adolescent brain, what I heard her say was, Eric, you're going to kill yourself if you don't quit drinking tea and coffee. And I love you. Please stop drinking tea and coffee.
That's what your brain heard.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
And so I went home from school that day and I said, Mom, I can't drink tea, coffee, or sodas anymore because they're bad for me. Miss White said so. And my mom is a great Southern mom, so she patted me on the shoulder and said, okay, son, that's fine, because she knew I'd get up in the morning and have coffee before school and then drink a gallon of sweet iced tea after school. But I didn't. I drank nothing but water for the next 20 years. Nothing but water.
Milk?
No milk.
Coke?
No Coke. Just water. I mean, it was cold turkey in junior high. Just from then, boom, that's all I drank. But I was living in Orlando. I was working for a publishing company in Orlando. I had, and I was like most people, I got a cold every year, and I get it, and I couldn't get rid of it, and nothing tasted good because all I drank was water, and water tastes terrible when you have a sore throat. And so I wanted something hot. And I did drink hot chocolate every now and then, but not often. But that didn't taste good either because it was too sweet. And so somebody said, you should try herbal tea. I said, I don't drink tea. I hate tea. Well, no, you really should try this. And they told me about this thing called throat coat that you see at the grocery store.
Yeah, I've got some of that.
Try some throat coats. You'll like it.
And
It'll
it's
make your
good,
throat
by
feel
the way.
better. Well, I was so impressed by how much it made my throat feel better that I decided I would start experimenting with whatever was at the grocery store. So I started buying more teas and trying them, and I like this, don't like this, like this, don't like this. Well, that went on for quite a few years, probably 4 or 5 years. And then I moved here. I was actually working for Life Care at the time, and Life Care had sent me to Denver on business. And so I was out there, and I walked past this store called Tivana, and I thought, wait a minute. You mean there's an entire store that's dedicated to tea? That's not even possible, because tea was nowhere. Coffee's everywhere, tea is nowhere. And at this time, Tivana was still a fairly new company. They had only expanded to a few states. So I went in, they told me about all their loose leaf teas and maybe try, and I was absolutely blown away by how different it tasted from what I was used to. So I bought up a whole bunch of that stuff and shipped it back to Cleveland. And since then, I have been on a journey to learn as much as I can about tea. I have a whole library full of books on tea. I study tea, I journal tea, I drink tea because I just love it. And I'm so fascinated by the fact that one plant can give me so many different flavors and looks.
Do you have any ADD or ADHD or were the compulsive disorders?
Nope. No. I just am, I love to learn. I'm a student. So if I find something I like, then I study it because I want to understand it. My dad taught me, my dad was typical, Southern guy, just very smart, but not school smart. And he would always teach me why. Why does that work? Because I could come home and I might be working on a math problem and I'd get it right. And he'd say, yeah, but why is it right? I don't know. It's just right. Well, then you don't know. So he taught me to always ask why. Why does something work like that? And so when I am trying to learn something, so tea is one of those things. Again, it's just a hobby for me. It's not something, I don't spend all day, every day thinking about tea. But I want to, if I'm going to learn it, then I want to really learn about it. I want to know why it works that way. I want to know the science behind it. I want to understand the plant and what makes it so different. And why is it that if you grow a tea plant near jasmine flowers, that all of a sudden that tea tastes like jasmine?
That is very odd.
Yeah. So those are the kind of things that fascinate me. So this is your American Classic Charleston Tea Plantation.
Charleston.
This is just a black tea. And
Made in the USA.
Made in the USA.
Where Trump's trying to win the vote.
That is a good tea. It's nice and smooth. And so like on if I were doing this for in fact, I'll just do one. Because I don't think I actually.
Yeah, let's do one. Let's
have it. So what I would do is I would go through and I would write down the name of the tea, the brand, the vendor, the country of origin, America. Any non-tea ingredients, there's none. Where did I brew it at? I brewed it at 210 degrees. It is a black tea, just a plain black tea. I brewed it for 4 minutes and 42 seconds, so I'll write that in there. And then you get into the flavor. Flavor is a combination of taste buds and smell. In fact, it's more smell than it is anything. That's why if you hold your nose when you're drinking or eating something, you can't taste it.
You could go on a diet by just holding your nose.
Yeah. So most of what you're getting when you take a sip of tea is you're getting the actual aromas more than the flavors on your tongue. That's why when you see people who are doing tea tasting, they don't do what I just did. They do this. They let it aerate. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to take a regular sip of tea, just like you normally would. Okay. Got it? Now I want you to take it and slurp it and roll it around in your mouth and see how different it tastes. See how much fuller it is, how much more you get?
It really is.
Because it's all those aromas.
I don't know if you put that in my head or not, but it has a lot more earthy taste.
Yeah, way more. You can get when people are doing tea tasting, they do that so that they can pull out all those molecules, whether it's from the aroma or from the taste itself, and identify them as a part of that tea makeup. So for me, again, what you just said is right. That's very earthy, so I'm going to mark it on my earthy spot.
To me, it tasted like, I didn't get earthy from anywhere other than it kind of had a sense of slight dirt, but it was very good.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people will interpret these in different ways, but earthy basically means exactly, for a lot of tea tasters, means exactly what you just said. You can just tell that it just comes from the earth. There's just something about it.
It's like you're grading 20 acres and it's that feeling.
Yeah. It can also, if it's a green tea, it's going to be very vegetal. It might remind you of spinach or lychee or asparagus. It depends on the green tea, depends on how it's processed, but it's
what it was grown near.
What it was grown near, what kind of soil, what kind of elevation, whether it was grown at low elevations or high elevations. They can be fruity. There are some teas. I had a green tea that is called Ancient Tree Dan Kong, because it comes from a tea that is rumored to be, I want to say, almost 1,000 years old. That plant, almost 1,000 years old. It grows on the cliffside in the Dan Kong region of China.
One plant?
Just one plant.
It hadn't fell over? Or...
Nope. And so when you get ancient tea trees, they have a very unique flavor of their own. So a lot of oolong teas, automatically, because of the way they're processed, they have kind of a hint of a peachiness underneath them. But you really get that in the Dan Kong. I mean, it comes through loud and clear. There's no peach in it. There's no peaches grown anywhere near it. It's just the way that the Camellia sinensis plant absorbs all the other things around it. All those molecules come together, and it's reminiscent of peaches, which is really fascinating. So I would go through and I would mark off all the things that I think, is it floral? No. Is it spicy? No. Is it sweet? Not, it does have
I don't get any sweetness. I don't get any sweetness.
For me, way down underneath, there's just a tiny hint. And again, it's different for everybody. So that's why you fill these out for yourself and don't depend on what it says on the package. Because a lot of times, whatever the package says, I'm like, no, I don't get that. I didn't taste that in there at all.
This is almost like working a crossword puzzle.
It is, yeah. And then I'll make notes. I'll make comments about, like you can see this one that I made. I said the saffron is definitely the first thing that you smell, and then comes the lemongrass. And so a lot of times I'll take the leaf itself, and I'll smell just the plain dry leaves, and then I'll smell the aroma that's coming off the cup after it's brewed, which is called the liquor. I'll smell the liquor and see if there's a difference between the two. I'll smell the leaves after they've cooled and dried. And in fact, there are a lot of people that will tell you if you've never had a wet nose from leaves, then you really haven't ever tasted tea, because that's just part of the tasting experiences. Really sticking your nose in there and getting a good deep whiff. The Vietnamese? No, Koreans. The Koreans actually have something they call tasting or smelling cups. And the only purpose of it, it's a little contraption, it's just a little kind of like a saucer and cup. They put the tea in it and turn it upside down, it comes off, and it traps. If you were to pour this all out, all of the chemicals that make up this tea are still lining the inside of that glass. And so what they'll do is they'll do that real quick, pour it out, and then they stick their nose in and smell the cup, because it's left behind all of those chemicals.
Residual.
Yeah. And so that's part of their tea tasting process, and that's the Koreans do that, South Koreans. So I'll look at the brew color. You can see this is a very beautiful, like a dark honey almost. And so looking on my color chart here, I would sort of mark it down here
It
somewhere.
almost looks like a flame in a fire.
Yeah, that's pretty, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Beautiful tea. And then when they talk about body weight or heft of tea, what they're really talking about is you can tell when you take a drink of something and say, oh, it's really light.
Mm-hmm.
But then you take a drink of something else, like maybe milk, you know, like that's really thick and heavy. Right?
Stays with you.
Yeah. And so how hefty is
Well,
this
don't
tea
tell me.
for
Let
you?
me
So
see if
yeah,
I-
you tell me how hefty you think it is.
I would say it'd be a little right of medium.
So you put it,
I would put it here.
okay.
What
and
do you-
I would have put it just because I have other teas that I have tasted.
That you're comparing to.
Yeah, I would have put it just slightly left of it. So we're
If you
pretty
get
much the same ballpark.
if you get much righter than this, what would the tea that was here? That would be a.
I don't think I've ever had a tea so far that I've tasted that I would put all the way down there on of what I would call a full
There's
hefty.
some
The
obviously-
closest for me would be a Pu'er. I've had a Pu'er in New York, which the place is not even there anymore. It's called Sanctuary Tea, and it was an age. So one difference in tea is that a lot of times you'll hear people talk about the difference in the teas, you know, white, yellow, green, oolong, black, is the fermentation. Tea is not fermented. It's oxidized, and there's a huge difference chemically between those two things. So if you take a banana and you peel it open and you set it on your counter, what happens to it after about 15 minutes?
Turns brown.
That's oxidation. Same thing with a potato or an apple. Okay, that's oxidation. That's not fermentation. Fermentation is when it's breaking down and it's turning those sugars into alcohol, right? That's fermentation. That's different. There is a type of tea, though, that is fermented. That's Pu'er. So what they'll do is they'll take black tea, they'll pound it into cakes, and I'm really oversimplifying the process, and then they set it aside to age. And there literally are teas that are hundreds of years old, but you and I can't afford even a cup of them because they're so expensive and so rare.
And they have some alcohol, I guess, if it's fermented.
Yeah, they're fully fermented, and so it's. I don't know what the alcoholic content is. I don't know enough about the really true aged Pu'ers to know that. I've only had Pu'ers that are been aged for 5 or 10 years or whatever. But those are they can be very hefty for me. Now other people might say something different, but for me I found those to be very hefty. There's another thing in tea where people talk about the mouthfeel, whether or not it feels real dry on your mouth, which is like you would call it bitter, but what you're really talking about is what in tasting they would call astringency.
This is heavy in that. I can feel it.
Yeah, and that's because of the tannins. So when you process a tea to become a black tea, the black is a tannin, and a tannin is very bitter or astringent, and so you get that real. And so the more of those black tannins that are in the tea, the more astringent it'll be. If you had squeezed your tea bag, you're going to get a whole lot more of that, and it's going to have a real bite to it.
And I don't mind it.
Yeah. Sometimes I like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm looking
Yeah.
for a bite, and
Yeah.
so I'll do that to get that extra bite. You can do the same thing just in the way you brew a tea. Like if I'll take my brewer, and I've got green tea, and I drop my leaves in there, and I'm pouring my water in there, I can do 2 different types of infusion. I can do direct or indirect. Direct means I'm pouring the water right on the leaves, and it's just jostling and going crazy, and leaves are stirring everywhere. That brings out a lot more of those minerals. Indirect means I'm pouring the water on the vessel, and it's seeping down, and the tea is just slowly floating up. And so,
It's your wife.
yeah. And so when that's happening, you're going to get a smoother cup of tea because a lot less of those minerals are going to leach into the water.
When you pour it indirect.
Indirect, right. So it's amazing how little tiny things like that can make a tremendous difference just in the subtle flavors of tea. Now, if you are again, if you aren't getting to the place where you're going to take the time to look for those subtleties, you won't notice it. But if you do take the time to slow down, let tea, because again, tea is, I always tell people the difference primarily between tea and coffee is that coffee is meant to be a fast drink, and it's meant to make you feel fast. Okay? It has, on average, 3 times more caffeine than a cup of tea. Average cup of tea can have anywhere from 50 to maximum of 90 or 100 milligrams of caffeine, but a cup of coffee can have up to 150 just for a regular cup of coffee. And then when you get into those other specialty coffees, they can have more than that. Okay? So there's a lot more caffeine. So coffee is meant to be fast, meant to make you feel fast, go fast, drink fast. Tea is slow.
Sort of like high tea.
Yeah.
Slow down.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah. That's the reason that tea is, it's the second most consumed drink in all the world, second only to water.
Is that right?
No other drink.
So it's more than coffee.
More than coffee, more than alcohol. Tea is the second most consumed drink in the world. And it's been consumed for ages. And if you ask the Chinese, for 5,000 years they've been drinking tea. Right? The rest of us haven't come along that. The East Indian Tea Company brought it over to the British, we'll say.
Now go back to that. Here, have a cookie.
Oh, yeah.
Go back to that, the East India. That interests me.
So,
is this a good?
Oh yeah, yeah. I love these cookies. So in the history of tea, once it was discovered that the Chinese had this drink that was phenomenal, it was so different. Then the Europeans wanted a piece of that action. And they had this East Indian Trading Company, which was basically shipping, right? They would go to foreign lands and they would bring back exotic things, right? Mostly for the aristocracy. Well, at that time, you really only had water, milk from your animals, and alcohol. And most of parties, whether it was a dinner party or just a social gathering, was a chance for the guys to sit around and get drunk. That's what literally meant drinking under the table, because they'd get so drunk they would be under the table from drinking.
Because all they had was milk, water, or alcohol.
Pretty much.
What era?
We're talking way back in the early 1800s.
Not long ago, in the big scheme of things.
In the big scheme of things, no. And I might have my dates wrong, but that's what I'm thinking of. So the aristocracy, and it might even be the 1700s, but the aristocracy got hold of somebody, basically went over and let's just use the word steal, because that's basically what they did. They just stole some tea to take it back and say, look at what we found here. And then, of course, they worked out trade agreements where they would...
We found this drink, this thing that's...
But then the rich people said, I want that, and I'm willing to pay for it. And so if a lady of a house wanted to have a dinner party and invite all of her wealthy friends over, she could do it the normal way, or she, who happened to have access to some tea...
And the financial ability...
And the financial ability, she would say, I have a new drink. Come over for this party. And so the women started drinking tea as a way to showcase their wealth and their status in society. And so then they eventually started having parties that were totally tea, or teetotal.
Tea party.
Teetotaler. Yeah, so if you've heard people say, oh, I'm a teetotaler, well, that means I don't drink alcohol, right? Well, those parties were teetotal parties. They were parties that had no alcohol. They were just tea, because tea was the in thing. It was the hot thing. It was the thing that so few people could get their hands on. So that's kind of how that old idea started. Eventually, once production got high enough and the trade agreements got high enough and they could start bringing more and more tea over, then it just spread from there, which is why it's still the #1 most consumed drink by all people in that part of the world. So that's kind of kind of a brief and loose history of. I'm sure you can look it up on the internet and get a whole lot better
That
version.
explains the high tea in London
Yeah.
and in Britain
Yeah.
and the expensive hotels.
Mm-hmm.
Does this mess up the taste?
Oh no.
Do you have anything on here for? I was eating it's basically a gingerbread.
Well, I don't typically have anything
Nothing?
when I'm doing a tea tasting. Yeah, if I'm tasting a tea for the first time, nothing. No, of course I don't put sweetener or anything in my tea anymore, but no sweeteners, no cookies, no sandwiches, no nothing. I'm just focused on the tea because I don't want to have that happen. I don't want
That would totally. This might be a good tea, but
Right.
if I eat the cookie, it may not be it.
And these ginger cookies are such a fantastic with a black tea. They're just a excellent combination. It's just like
Boy, it is, isn't it?
if you go to a restaurant and they're saying, well, what are you going to have? Well, I want to go to order the salmon. Okay, well, you might want to pair it with this wine. Mm-hmm. Well, they do the same thing with tea now in a lot of really fancy restaurants and hotels. What are you going to eat? It will pair well with this kind of tea. And so they'll bring out a specific tea that pairs with it. There are whole industries that have cropped up over learning to pair foods with certain types of teas.
But you're on with your study and you're almost taking this to a religious experience without the religion. I think there's something about stopping
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about something else,
Mm-hmm.
focusing on something else,
Yep.
relaxing, taking a few minutes, whether it be filling out this form
Sure. Right. Yeah.
or deciding what the taste is. It's almost methodical in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to compare it to.
Yeah.
Almost like they would, go and pray in front of the Muslims go and pray and chant in front of the wall.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
What would you compare this to?
No, I think that's a fair comparison because it is ritualistic.
Ritualistic is what I was looking
Yeah.
for.
And I mean, there's psychological value in ritual.
Go deeper with that.
The fact that you have something that you can go back to, something that to use a more generic term that centers you. Like this is something that I do. This is a process that I use, and it can be anything. It can be I have a ritual that every morning I get up and I put my slippers on because it feels so warm on my feet, and I walk to the window and open the shade so I can see the sunlight, and that can be a ritual.
It has nothing to do with the slippers, the warmth, or the sunlight.
Yeah,
Maybe.
It's just something I do because it kind of grounds me and centers me and lets me get my day started right, or whatever it is that you do, right?
Now let me say this. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier. This COVID thing and skipping church, and I've grown up going to church every Sunday morning. I go to church. And with this COVID thing, not going to church, I don't know what day of the week it is.
Right.
So I almost think going to church is a ritual.
Yeah, it is.
Irregardless of what the preacher's saying,
Right.
it's a ritualistic thing that centers you,
Yeah.
that makes sense of this world we're in.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe taking a high tea
Yeah.
centers you for the day.
It could, absolutely. It could.
It's ritualistic.
And again, I don't make myself a sort of high tea experience. I don't make the cakes and things like that. But I do take time to savor. I guess that's a better way maybe to put it. I savor a cup of tea. So
Or is it the moment?
I savor the moment sometimes too. So when I do like I said, my version of a Lectio Divina, I savor the moment as well. And sometimes I do that with, I make it a pure spiritual experience, right? And so I combine it with I'm reading a passage of Scripture. And so again, it's the same exact framework. TEA. Take note, elevate, ascend. Take note, elevate, ascend. And so if I'm using it in a devotional sense, I take note of what the Scripture is saying, and then I elevate that passage of Scripture by trying to meditate on it, chew on it, think about other Scriptures that it might relate to, other principles that I know in Scripture that it might relate to. Maybe asking God, what is it that you're trying to say to me through this? Or a framework that me and my family have used for a long time, which how is this helping me to know God, live for God, love others, and bear fruit? Is there something in this passage of Scripture that's helping me in one of those 4 ways? That's kind of the framework for disciples. And then the final part of that is the ascend in prayer. That's from the Psalm verse. You know, my incense rise to you like prayer. And so a lot of times I literally will take a hot steaming cup of tea because, again, every tea is the aroma that's coming off of it. It's just like incense. And I'll just breathe it in, and then I'll just pray. And maybe the verse of, like today, Pastor Mark Williams, North Cleveland, which is what our family is a part of. He talked about Jeremiah 29:7, and it was this whole idea of seeking the welfare of the city and then praying. And one of the things I noticed in that passage, that the Hebrew word there for seek, which is danash, literally means to inquire, to be inquisitive, to go after, to try to figure out. So try to figure out what the welfare of the city is, and then use that information that you've learned to pray for your city. And so in that situation, if I'm doing a devotional on that, I might think about that, chew on that, take a deep breath, and I'm learned that Mayor Brooks has a special meeting, right, that he has to go to. And Father, I just pray for Mayor Brooks. I pray for this specific meeting. I pray that you'll give him wisdom, right? And it just becomes a contemplative spiritual experience. All I'm doing is there's nothing special in the tea. The tea is not divine.
That's my point.
Yeah. It's just part of the ritual. It's something I can use.
But it could become a necessity.
Yeah, but because I allow it to ground me and to bring me back.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right.
We've come all the way around to say that, but that's exactly right. It's just like going to church on Sundays, or going to your mother's on Thursday nights because you've done that forever, or smelling the fruit,
right,
or smelling the Robios tea.
Yeah, so many things that we can make rituals in our lives, and they can be good rituals or bad rituals. You know, it's just a matter of habit.
Now, going back to branding, I'm trying to relate this in my mind. It's related. I just can't put it into words. But,
okay.
If you can use this ritualistically to center you. You could break a bad habit by reversing that somehow.
Sure.
Like say you're an alcoholic.
Right.
You could probably a lot of alcoholics are alcoholics because they drink a beer at dinner or wine at night or whatever it is they do. So you could break that by getting out of the surrounding ritual.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that people talk about in habit formation is that a lot of times the context is part of the hook of the habit itself.
And say that again.
So if you have a habit, think of a habit as something that has its hooks in you, right? Like you're a fish and you've just been hooked. Part of the hook is the context. And so people will say, you hear people say all the time, "Oh, I was triggered by blah, blah, blah." "Oh, he so triggered me, that triggered me." Well, habits are literally triggered. And the reason is because your brain is the most efficient organ on planet Earth. way more efficient than any computer. And it's always looking for ways to be more efficient. And the way that the brain can be most efficient is by taking something and allowing it to become a habit and then storing that habit away. That way, it doesn't have to waste conscious thought on it. So for example, if you get into your car right now and you drive anywhere in this city, chances are you literally could drive from here to the other side of the town thinking about one thing and then realize, oh wait, I'm here. Now think about all the things you had to do to get safely through traffic from one side of town to the other. That is a tremendous amount of activity.
You couldn't count them all.
You couldn't count it all, but it's habit. So your brain saves energy by making those habits that you can do subconsciously without having to fire the conscious mind. So that's what a habit is. Context can trigger a habit. And so if you establish a habit of praying with a cup of tea, then that could be, if you love drinking tea and you have a hard time making yourself pray or read the Bible, and that's something you really want to do, then just tie it together. Tie an existing habit or context into what you want to be the new habit that you can add to that. And eventually, if you do it enough, they will become tied together and it'll just seem like second nature for you. Like if I don't say a word of prayer when I take a cup of tea, then that would be weird because I've gotten so used to praying every time I take a nice whiff of a cup of tea, right?
See, I want to work a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's a habit.
It's a connection that I didn't consciously make, but it's there.
Right. Yeah, and tea becomes the context for the jigsaw puzzle, but it could also work the other way around. If somebody pulled out a jigsaw puzzle, you might all of a sudden say, I really wish I had a cup of tea right now.
That's right.
Right? Because they're connected.
It's too simple.
Yeah.
It's too simple.
But it's so complex at the same time.
Yeah, you almost have to do this to see how simple that is.
Right.
And if you could take this thing or this method, you could become great.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in this, but in anything.
Yeah, it could be anything.
See, it's not tea.
No, not tea.
It's nothing. It's nothing to do with tea.
No, tea is just a framework that you use to build whatever habits that you want, if they're contemplative habits or if they're slow down habits or if they're, maybe it's just a health habit.
Or destructive habits.
Yeah, yeah. So, you talked about somebody who wants to stop drinking. They realize that for whatever reason, this is not what they want in their life, or it's not good for them, or their doctor told them they had to quit, or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. Then you got to find a way to replace that habit. A habit is something, again, we have to remember, it's subconscious. It's been pushed deep inside your mind. It fires without you thinking consciously about it. So then you got to pay attention to that habit. What are the triggers? What is it that makes me want that drink? What is it that makes me want to go there? What are the situations? And then you got to figure out a way to change the context or swap little things out. There's one guy, there's a book you probably have heard of, or maybe some of your viewers have heard of, called Atomic Habits. And he just talks about breaking them down into the little atomic things, the little tiny things, because those will snowball if you add them up. But
I've read his book, and you've actually made it simpler, but by not looking at the exact thing.
Yeah, yeah.
This relates to your branding business.
Yeah, yeah. It's all the same thing for me.
It's the same thing.
For me, it's all the same thing. Yep.
Boy, that is, that's deep, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Now, here's the ironic thing I'm seeing. I see all of this. This is very interesting, and I'm seeing how this is a way to make a person better or enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
But in your branding, you're actually using, in other words, sort of jujitsu. You're using the knowledge of this to brand something.
Right.
Do you see the irony in that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is probably why you're good at it.
Yeah, they work back and forth. It's like a cycle. Yeah.
Because, and I know you're not trying to get them to become alcoholics, but you're trying to get them to relate by needing this to that brand.
Yeah, yeah. So like for me, if you look at, so like I said, there is a Teology Prof website. It's very undeveloped. There's even a lot of dummy text on there. I mean, it's because I haven't really done a whole lot with it. There's a Theology Prof Instagram. There's a Theology Prof Facebook, Theology Prof Twitter. But Eric Wilbanks has been around a lot longer than that. EricWilbanks.com is where my website is. That's all about change. How do you do the things you need to do to become a better version of you, to improve your life in some way? Right? And so there are, for me, 4 things that I focus on in terms of helping myself change and helping other people change. Change through psychology, which I love. I was a psych major at Lee. Change through what I call brandology, which is the branding process. So you can change your brand, change your brand strategy, change the way you think about branding your business. There's change through teology, which is using tea, maybe in a contemplative way to bring change, interchange, right? So the brandology, psychology, teology, and then of course for me, the one that's the most important is theology. How can Scripture change me on the inside out? So for me, it's all about what is it that I think would make my life better? My life, my business, my relationships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then how can I use these 4 simple things that people already know something about to make things a little better? And that's it. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. That's who I've been for years, and it's who I assume I'll always be.
Do you think that a lot of this stuff we went through in life that looks chaotic, it's all more of a pattern than we realize? It seems like chaos, but all these things that led you to this and to your business branding is all related.
Yeah, honey, I'll give you an example. So I mentioned that when I lived in Orlando, I worked for a publishing company. So at this publishing company, I was responsible for developing resources for youth and children's pastors. So I developed curriculum, I wrote curriculum, books, conferences and events, websites, e-newsletters, the whole 9 yards, right? I had an e-newsletter, and again, this is way before anything social media. Okay? In fact, blogs were still misunderstood. People didn't even really know what a blog was. Even though they were out, there weren't a lot of people doing it. And I had an email newsletter that I sent to youth pastors all over the world. I think within the first year, I had about 5,000 subscribers on that, which going from 0 to 5,000 in 1 year back in the early 90s was pretty phenomenal. Anybody could get there these days, but back then, that was hard work. In that, what I did was I would sit down with basically what you're doing. I would sit down with a youth pastor from somewhere in the world and I would interview them. I would get them to tell me their life story. I had a whole list of questions I would just prompt them with, and I would just record it. And then I would go back through that interview and I would look for the thread, because it always existed. There was never an exception. There was always one single thread that ran through that person's life, twisting and turning and weaving, but it was always the same thing. And then I would write articles that showed how all the things that happened in this person's life are what make them successful at this moment in their life. And so if you want to be successful like them, because these were very successful youth pastors, you don't do it by copying what they're doing. You do it by copying how they did it. In other words, you find out what that thread is in your life, and then you use that to become the most successful you that you can be. So You can't just borrow somebody else's recipe and think that you can cook it as good as Emerald, right? Exactly. You take your own recipe and you make it up, and then you can be successful doing that. And that like I said, that always was there. There was never an exception. And I want to say, I was about to say there might have been one time, there was none. There was no exceptions. Every youth pastor that I interviewed, when I showed them these articles and showed them the thread, they were blown away. They said, I never realized my life had that same thing running through it from top to bottom. I never knew that. So they didn't even know it themselves, that the thread was there.
I guess none of us know it till we're there.
Yeah, or until you take the time to think through it and go, what is this thread in my life? Yeah.
High tea.
Right, yeah.
Or what'd you call it? Not high tea, but that other.
The Lectio Divina?
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So just looking and figuring out so for me, that thread has been this idea of an architect. So I am a change architect. I can't make you change, but I can help design blueprints for change for you that can help you to get there. But you still got to do the hard work. I mean, you know it, your business. The architect is not really doing the hard work.
No, he's doing the easy part.
He's doing the hard work is the actual building.
Yeah.
I can't do that for you. I'm having a hard enough time doing that for myself. That takes a lot of effort to build change into my life. And there are a lot of deep-seated things that, those going back to the whole neural network.
Yeah.
That's a lifetime. That'd be like deciding we don't like Keith Street anymore. We're going to rip it up. We're going to create a different thoroughfare. How much time and energy and resources would that take?
Or better yet, it's there, but I'm not going to take it anymore. Try that for 1 week.
Yeah. So
you couldn't do it.
Yeah, when you want to do that in your brain, that is a lot of effort to take up a well-worn path and to replace it with a better path. So somebody tells you can build a new habit in 21 days, forget it. That's the biggest load of crock I've ever heard in my life. Try 9 months. It takes 9 months to form a baby. I mean, right?
Yeah.
Give yourself 9 months to form a new habit before you give up. If you give up after 21 days, then you've barely even gotten started.
And the biggest thing is stay convinced for 9 months that you want to change that.
Yeah, exactly.
You may decide, hey, I'm just going to take Keith Street.
Right, exactly.
So how do we even know what the change to make?
Well, I think most people know
back to your thread.
Do.
That's where they get the expression "common thread."
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess.
Right. Yeah, I think you're probably right. Common
That's
thread.
the common thread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it runs through all of our lives. I think you're right. I think it's not as chaotic as it seems.
Not looking back, but while you're in
Looking forward,
it's pretty chaotic.
Well, you think about I love to go down to Fletcher and walk because it's so beautiful down there. Mm-hmm. And if you go and you stand in the middle of the path there where you're just surrounded by trees and you just take just 1 second to look at all those trees out there and just think about it. I've done this on several occasions. Just stand there and look. There are countless trees. There's no way I could count how many trees are out there. They've just grown by themselves. It's a chaotic look.
It's chaotic.
Yet it's not. When you look at it from above, you realize, wait a minute. I've actually looked and said, why is it that those trees stopped growing right here? This land wasn't cleared. It just remains clear. Why is that? It's not chaotic if you can get far enough above. It just looks chaotic when you're in the middle of it. And so a lot of times our life feels chaotic because we're right in the middle of it. All we see is all the trees around us. But if we could just get high enough, get a better perspective on things, we realize that's not so chaotic after all. It's like the old analogy of a person who's knitting some sort of piece of artwork, right? And on the front of it is this beautiful picture. On the back of it's just a bunch of random colors and threads hanging all over the place.
Yeah, if you look at the back, it looks horrible.
Yeah.
No, what they call that? Macrame?
I don't know, but yeah, same exact idea.
Needlepoint.
Needlepoint, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, being able to stand back and look at it, that's very helpful. But you have to want to take the time to slow down and step back and take a long big picture look at your life and say, what is it that I really need to change?
But now, taking your tea time, you say you're not doing that then.
I don't do it every day, no.
No, what do you call that? Not the high tea, but
Delectio Divina?
Delectio
Yeah, I
Divina.
don't do that. I usually only do that if A, I feel like I need that contemplative moment for that moment, right? I need to get away, or B, when I'm trying a new tea.
But now that is stepping back and looking at something, but you're not looking at it. I mean, you're stepping back, you're taking a moment, you're calming down, but you're not looking at that issue. You're
Right.
looking at this.
Yeah, no, I'm not paying attention.
But you're
to the
thinking,
issue.
but you're saying it can still help to center you to solve the thing that you're not thinking about.
Yeah, because a lot of times when we get frustrated by a problem or an issue that we can't solve, it's because we've lost the ability to see the big picture, right? And we get so frustrated, we get so overwhelmed by all of the data that's coming at us, right? That all we see are trees. And sometimes it just helps to just step back and go, wait a minute, okay, I know there's a lot of trees there, but there's also a beautiful forest that starts here, that ends here, that winds here, that goes to the river, and there's a river there and a snake's there. Oh, okay, now I see it. Now it's making better sense. So sometimes just stepping away from something and sort of calming yourself down, relaxing.
And not even necessarily looking at it.
Right. It just helps you when you go back to it to have a little better perspective. Again, I like to do that by taking a walk. If I've got something that I really can't figure out, a problem that I'm really struggling with, I will fix myself a cup of tea. I'll put it in my stainless steel thermos, and I will go down to Fletcher, and I will walk, and I will sip, and I will think until a solution hits me. And I mean, that happens very often. But I use the combination of the two. I'm not sitting down having tea, but I am having tea, and I'm still doing the same thing. I'm smelling it. I flipped the lid open, and I'm smelling that tea, and I'm just taking it in, and I'm letting it relax me, and I'm enjoying every sip, and I'm just thinking, and I'm walking, and I'm talking out loud to myself. And if people saw me, they'd probably think I was crazy, you know. But that's what I do to just process. If I got a big problem for a client that I can't figure out, that's what I do.
That is very amazing. I see how this is tied together. I assume you do.
Oh, yeah.
Or can you see the thread?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and again, like I said, for me, it's all about how do I take control of something that is overwhelming me for this kind of stuff and take back control of me. It's not really about the tea. Tea is just a vessel. It's just a thing that I do. It could be anything for you. You know, it could be taking a walk. It could be sitting down with your dog and petting your dog for 5 minutes, right? But just stepping back, taking back control of your emotions, getting yourself back. Okay, breathe. Some people will just do breathing exercises. Just sit down and take 10 slow, deep breaths. Hold it for 15 seconds, release it over 15 seconds. That's another way that people do just relaxing techniques and grounding yourself. And because your emotions can run wild on you. And they can really mess you up, especially when you talked about, you know, facing a problem you can't solve. If you let your emotions get, and people will laugh, people who know me really well will, you know, laugh and say I don't have any emotions. But the people who live with me know I do. You know?
Yeah.
And I can have them pretty deeply. So I have to really work sometimes to rein those emotions in, not allow them to run away with me, remind myself of the facts and the truth of a situation, you know. Like if you're, you know, a coworker or your child or your spouse, you know, does something that makes you mad, you might have a gut reaction that says, they hate me, or why are they doing this to me? Why are they inflicting this on me? But if you just take time to step back away from it, get control of your emotions, you realize, oh, it doesn't have anything to do with how they feel about me. It might have everything to do with how they feel about themselves right in this moment because they just got a call from blah, blah, blah that really upset them. And that upset is just pouring out on me, right? Could be anything. Could be little, could be big. But stepping back away from that and realizing, no, I can't allow that to overwhelm me and take control of me at this moment. I've got to figure out a way to get back to where I'm in control. I'm in the driver's seat, not some emotion that was created in the moment. You know?
You seem to be the most stable, emotional person I believe I've ever met.
That's pretty sad. You know, and again, I think some people would probably say that. I don't know if my wife and kids would say that, but you know, that'd be an interesting question to ask them. How stable and emotional do they see me?
It would depend on if anybody was listening to them when you asked
Right,
them.
exactly, yeah. So, you know, I really do try. I try very hard to maintain control of my emotions because I believe that emotions play a role, but they should never be in the driver's seat. That's just a personal belief. You know, it's not an absolute. I don't see it in Scripture anywhere.
Almost like Spock on
A lot like Spock. I'm a longtime Star Trek fan.
because he had no emotions.
He had, well,
No,
he controlled his emotions.
He controlled his.
Yeah.
Well, no, according to the
But he had a
storyline, he didn't have any. Did
Well,
he?
no, he had a human mom. He
Yeah,
had
a human mom
had
and a
Vulcan dad.
Vulcan
so
dad, yeah.
He had emotions, but he had to work super hard to control them. So,
yeah.
unlike a true-blooded Vulcan who was
Yeah,
not,
yeah. That was a good show,
That was a
wasn't it?
great show.
So what else do you do besides this? And you know, let's go back to this for a minute. This interesting thing. I ride bicycles with my friend Alvin Calhoun. We was riding down the road and we was going to take a left, and so he points to the car coming. Well, the guy in the car points straight ahead. And we both thought for a minute, you know, you could get mad at that.
Right.
We're going that way, and he's saying, well, I'm going this way. Or was he saying, that's fine, you're going this way? You could take that 15 different ways. Mm-hmm. He might have been pointing at a dog and not even pointing at the road.
Right. Yeah.
So you've got to take everything at face value and not read into it. If you did, you'd stop the guy and throw a rock at him.
Give you a perfect example of that. Just the other day, my wife and I'm trying to remember where we were. It was somewhere in Middle Tennessee. I can't remember exactly where it was. But we had gotten out of our car, and this lady we heard coming up. There was another lady over here, and she was on her phone. There was a lady coming this way, and she was gesturing very loudly to this lady. And in the back of my mind, I thought, oh no, there's about to be a fight. What had happened was, and you could hear over here them talking, they were just right behind us the same way that you guys are right here, that the same thing, there was a gesture, and this lady was trying to make sure that she didn't do anything to make this lady mad because of the way that this lady gestured, and she just was coming up to try to make sure, are we okay? I hope I didn't make you mad, you know, blah, 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 and this lady was clueless because she was on her phone and she talks with her hands. Mm-hmm. And so when she gestured to the person she's talking to on the phone and had no idea that this lady was even in the picture. And so then you heard them just, oh, okay, that's great. Thank you so much, blah, 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 blah.
Wars are started that way.
Wars are started that way, yeah. Crazy, isn't it?
It's crazy. What they need to do is stop and have a
cup of tea.
Yeah, have a cup of tea.
You know, many, many wars have been discussed over a cup of tea. Many, many multi-billion-dollar deals have been discussed over a cup of tea. Many, many nation peace treaties have been discussed over a cup of tea. All throughout history, there are tremendous examples.
And the tea is the centering point, but it has nothing to do with the tea. But you need to focus on it so you can take your mind off focusing on the irrelevant things.
Yes. There's something about sitting down with a drink that is designed to be slow and relaxed and contemplative and having a conversation. Whereas if we sit down together with something that is designed to be consumed quickly and to pump us up, then the likelihood of us really having a nice, slow, relaxed conversation, especially on something that's tense, like trying to work out a peace treaty, that's going to be a whole lot harder because the caffeine is going to elevate your everything inside of you, right? Whereas the interesting thing about tea is that it doesn't just have caffeine. It does have caffeine, but it also has other chemicals in it that are calming and relaxing. And so it makes you alert but relaxed. Whereas tea or coffee just makes you alert and excited.
And nervous.
Yeah, it can make you nervous.
I could see where taking a cup of tea once a day and stopping could probably lower your blood pressure.
There actually are people that that would say that just the act can lower your blood pressure. But then there's also lots of scientific studies on the health benefits of tea. And there are those who would claim that that could be one of those. Now, again, how many studies have there been done? How conclusive are they? We don't really know. But there have been thousands of studies on tea and its health benefits. So,
do you see any benefits in drinking these teas that I mentioned, like like this throat coat and stuff like that? Is there some benefits in those teas?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because it just goes back to herbs. I mean, that'd be like, is there a benefit to eating more broccoli? Well, sure. Is there a benefit to, does ginger have any healing properties? Absolutely. What about citrus fruits, or et cetera, et cetera. Taking them, putting those things into a cup of hot water, getting all the good stuff out of it and drinking it. Yeah. I mean, that's nurture, that's sustenance, that's taking in good properties, so there's tons of health benefits.
Now, if somebody says, "Now that's not my cup of tea,"
right?
How I don't know how that would where that would come from, other than if I drank this Coke, I can't stand coconuts.
Right.
So I guess I would say that's not my cup of tea.
That's right. Yeah. And I'm guessing that's probably how that phrase got started.
Probably
I haven't looked it up.
Yeah.
But then it applies to all kinds of things. People can say, like you could say to me, let's sit down, let's talk politics. And I would say, that's not my cup of tea. I don't talk politics.
Yeah. All we do is get the aroma.
That's right.
And the smell.
Yeah.
Fill out this form.
Yeah, that's right.
Crossword puzzle.
That's right.
Man, it's been great.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Hey, Gwen, was that not the best one we've had?